Hi, everyone. This is Devin Dominic Johnson here. I'm the Retirement Plans Relationship Manager at Polaris Advisors, and I'm here today with Justin Dunwoody to discuss a little bit about funding your child's college education and some benefits and understanding, and just sort of talking through some issues to consider as you consider funding your child's college education. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Justin.
Thanks, Devin. So everybody, welcome today. Like Devin said, just going to go through some strategies and ideas around funding college education, which is something that's top of mind for a lot of parents these days. As we all know, college education does not seem to be getting any less expensive, and it's something that families are starting to try to think about as early as possible, so they can start to put together some strategies for funding those needs in retirement. So basically, there's a little fun disclosure about the document here. So that's like the 3-second disclosure. You can read quickly. And then, so basically what we got here is kind of what I mentioned is obviously never too early to start saving. I mean, ideally, the best time to start any type of savings program for education is really when the child is very, very young, to give you the most time possible to fund this and to allow it to grow in whatever fashion that account can grow in. So that basically what you're seeing is just some options that you have. So there's these accounts that are called custodial accounts. Typically, we use accounts that are called UGMAs or UTMAs, so Uniform Transfer to Minors accounts. So they can be used where basically the owner of the account is a parent, up until the child was what's called the age of majority, which in a lot of states is 18. There can be some benefits to UTMAs, being that obviously you control those dollars until your child is of a certain age. The issue that some people have with it is when that child becomes a certain age, say 18, it is technically their dollars, which the point of it is they probably don't have much income. So if they make a sale in that account to pay for education, their capital gains tax rate could be zero if they have no income, depending on how much in that account is sold. So that's kind of the benefit of it switching to the child's name, but you kind of lose control. So the child can technically use those funds for anything, since they own those dollars, when they reach age of majority. And it's taxed as part of your taxes annually if you have dividends and capital gains and things like that throughout the years of the child growing up to reach education age. There are these trusts that can be set up called minor trusts, and you can gift them. There's what's called a 2503C gift to a minor trust. Not a super common strategy. I'll talk about that a little bit. What people used to do, a lot of these Coverdell education savings accounts, used to be people called them like Coverdell education IRAs. Those were popular years ago. They've become much less popular now with the kind of popularity of 529s and the flexibility of them, which is the last dot there. Outright gifts. We have families that are maybe gifting to grandchildren or grandchildren or children, and they just make outright gifts, basically like paying tuition, paying room and board directly out of pocket. And then personal savings, just socking money away in the bank, right? Obviously, the last dot there, 529, is the most popular way, typically, to save for education. We're going to just go through little snippets about each and kind of help you understand what might make the most sense for you. Then the next slide actually does kind of add in an additional component, which people can utilize as well, which is cash value. And if you have a cash value building life insurance contract, those dollars can be used for education as well. You can borrow against the cash value in those contracts. Also, the cash value in life insurance is not an asset that is listed on a FAFSA form, so it's kind of hidden from FAFSA as well. So that can be a benefit to that. So the next slide we're going to look at is just kind of getting into some of the options you have. And the first one just goes through personal savings and investments. So, one simple strategy is just I'm going to open a savings account. I'm going to put money away. There's no limits. There's no issue with anything. Like I can put as much as I want in. Typically savings accounts, CDs, money markets, you're obviously not going to earn much on those. Interest rates are very low. Another issue to consider is you are building up assets that are going to be listed on a FAFSA form as well. Especially if that bank account or that savings account is in the child's name. You're building up assets in the child's name. That goes on the child's side of the FAFSA. So when you're thinking about the expected contribution rate, that when you look at a FAFSA form, how much they expect you to be able to contribute towards education, everything on the child's side is 100% expected to be used. So having savings accounts and investment accounts and things like that in the child's name isn't necessarily a great idea when you're thinking about filing a FAFSA form and trying to get aid or anything like that for the child. Also taxes. So if you just have your own investment account, you have capital gains taxes you have to pay, you have dividends taxes, things like that. So those are two issues to consider, but certainly an option. The next option is we're going to cover is just outright gifts to to the child or grandchild. So tuition payments are not actually considered gifts. So this all goes to like federal estate tax purposes. For most people, we don't have to worry too much about that. Right now, the federal estate tax limit, how much you can gift over your lifetime, is pretty high. So we don't have to worry too much about that. But there's no limits on that. You mean you can gift as much as you want, pay tuition for children, grandchildren. You're not really getting any real growth or gain on your dollars if you're doing that. But if you have accumulated significant funds and you're looking at a way to kind of gift that, certainly tuition payments, not considered gifts for federal estate tax purposes. Tuition and room and board, room and board and other non-tuition expenses are considered gifts for federal estate tax purposes. So something to think about. Also, impact on financial aid is important as well. Obviously, if you're gifting money to a child, and that's going to impact the ability for them to get any financial aid if they were potentially going to be eligible for it. But again, a strategy that there's no accumulation benefit to the strategy. It's just if you have dollars that you've accumulated and want to gift them, there can be some strategies to gift them. Especially if you are maybe somebody that has issues potentially down the road with the federal estate tax limits that, like I said, are pretty high. The next one we're going to cover is kind of some issues that why a lot of times people, which we covered some of them, but why people don't necessarily make just outright gifts. If you outright gift money to a child, they can pretty much do what they want. So you don't really have control of those dollars and how they're going to use it. If the child has any creditors, credit cards or anything like that, those funds are subject to their creditors and might be used for something like that. If they're under 18, investment income and gains, there's this special tax called a kiddie tax in the tax code that could come into play as well. When basically those outright gifts, as we mentioned, if they're applying for financial aid and they're filling out these FAFSA forms, those outright gifts are assets of the child. They're expected 100% to be used for school, which means if they had a chance of getting aid or any grants, any financial aid, anything like that, that probably is going to go away with those gifts. Then the next option we have on here is just talking about those custodial accounts, so UTMAs and UGMAs. Very, very simple to set up. You can pretty much invest them in anything. You can have stocks in there. You can have funds. You can have bonds. You're eventually shifting that appreciation and the income down the road to a younger family member who has less income and probably pays less taxes. And then those dollars don't have to be used for education, which is a big benefit. What if the child doesn't go to school? There's no penalties or anything like that for not using those funds, not for education. So there's some benefits to using these UTMA and UGMA custodial accounts. As I mentioned, usually typically 18, some states 21, very rarely 25, but typically, unfettered access to the funds. They can do what they want. So it's a lot of trust, I would say, in the child when they reach 18 to make sure they're using it for the things that you actually want them to use it for. Beneficiaries can't be changed is one option. One thing we say on here, just because in a 529 you can change beneficiaries. Again, it is a child's asset when you're filing FAFSA forms and calculating that EFC, the expected family contribution, that is an asset of the child, so it's expected to be used. Again, gains can be subject to the kiddie tax as well. So some things to consider on UTMAs and UGMAs. The next one we actually have on here is that 2053C, so 2503C trust for kids. This is, again, kind of like a custodial account in general. It's a little bit more complicated. There's an actual trust document here. The trust has to file a tax return. There's a legal cost of actually setting up a trust. So it's a little bit more complicated than your typical custodial account. But when you're thinking about this, there are this compliance with 2503 about the annual exclusion and basically your estate tax. So this can come into play when there is, potentially some issues with the lifetime exclusions for federal estate tax. These can start to become beneficial, at that point. The trustee of this trust has discretion on distribution. So it does really control what the child can do with the funds, which is why a lot of people like it. They can kind of make sure it's used for the things that they wanted to. And the beneficiaries of the trust being the child, they can kind of gain access to those funds when they're 21. Sometimes it's hard to change the trust, the beneficiary of the trust as well. So there is some inflexibility to the trust, but it does, again, discretion is of the trustee, the person starting the trust, that how they want those distributed. Again, going back to this whole thing, generally those trust assets are considered the child's asset because they're the beneficiary of the trust. So that typically these trusts are not set up for people that would be getting aid anyways. So that's usually not that much of a concern. But if there was potential for getting any financial aid, assets in this trust are the child's asset. So Coverdell education, savings accounts, kind of in a way, kind of like a 529. The reason why these are a little bit less popular now, similar things actually. So the assets are considered the parental asset. You can change the beneficiary, you get tax deferred growth. If it's used for qualified education expenses, they're income tax free. Those are very similar, types of things that happen in a 529. But Coverdell education accounts do have much lower limits. So because they are very, very similar to 529s, but have significantly lower limits, which actually the next slide does have on there the limits that you have on Coverdell education savings accounts. And this slide actually will show you, $2,000 annually per child. Well, you don't have those limits on 529s. So because there's also AGI limits, meaning how much income you can have and still make contributions to these Coverdell accounts. So because they're so very similar to 529s, and 529s do not have this $2,000 annual limit, do not have AGI limits, and do not have this designation that they have to be for somebody under age 18. Coverdell accounts have become increasingly less popular. We don't see them used very much at all anymore. One actual benefit to a Coverdell account is this last bullet point, is any unused assets typically transfer to the beneficiary. So that can be a positive or a negative. You may want to kind of keep it in the education account for grandkids down the road. But in general, these Coverdell savings accounts kind of transfer to children once they're age 30. And then the last, I should say second to last, there's one extra one we have on here, but the most popular by far, saving for education, is a 529. So all states have a plan. Many have multiple plans. Some are, investment plans where there's funds and investment options you invest in, and hopefully that grows over your child's life. Some are kind of like prepaid tuition plans in a way. You buy credits now, not in the future, thinking that credits could be significantly more expensive in the future. Again, these can be gifts. The gifts for federal estate tax purposes. They leave your estate. So if you're trying to kind of get your estate smaller for federal estate tax purposes, these gifts leave your estate, but you still control You still control that. You still, it's in your name, not the child's name. Many states have a state income tax deduction for making contributions, so that can be beneficial as well. You can always switch beneficiaries. If used for education, any appreciation in the account is income tax free federally, so that's a big plus. Typically, if you always name a successor on the account as well, something happens to you, you want to have somebody that can take care of those funds for your child or grandchild. You actually have the ability in here. You can gift quite a bit into these without affecting, gift tax or anything like that. You actually have 5 years of gift tax exclusions in advance that you can do. So very, very flexible. Usually there's a bunch of different investment options you can choose from as well. As I said, by far, the most popular way to save for education at this point, because of the flexibility that you have. Some limitations on them. Sometimes you'll see limitations on investment options, just depending on what state plan you choose. If some of them are a little limited, most of them are getting significantly better, where you have multiple investment options the whole way from something pretty aggressive to something pretty conservative. Depending on the state plan you choose, some are a little higher cost. Most of them now are getting very low cost. You see a lot of plans offered through companies like Vanguard and Fidelity and all these different fund families, T. Rowe Price, and you see all these different options, and they're becoming pretty cost efficient and pretty flexible, with pretty robust investment offerings. There is market risk, obviously, with any investment. You do have that market risk. You can have these kind of guaranteed prepaid tuition options that don't have market risk. But if the tuition really doesn't increase that much between when you put it in and when you take it out, it didn't really do a heck of a lot of good. But that does avoid the market risk that you would have in the investment style 529s. Also, what if you pass away while you're trying to fund this thing? That at that point, there's mortality risk that whoever's contributing to it passes away and has not been able to fully fund education at that point. The other thing that can go wrong too is if maybe there's a disability or something like that, or you can't contribute to it anymore, then you obviously don't have, the ability to contribute to that. And that would actually go for many of the different ones we talked about. Sometimes like UTMAs or trusts are funded in larger like lump sums early in the child's life, so they're kind of fully funded from the beginning. 529s, you can absolutely do that as well. But these are just some risks on any kind of investment type of education account that you would have. Again, it's in the parents' or grandparents' name, so it goes on their side of a FAFSA form. So for that expected family contribution, it doesn't necessarily expect you to put 100% of that towards school. So it can be, better for getting aid. The last strategy that we actually go through here, why adopting a strategy, we can tell you, without adopting a strategy, people tend to kind of procrastinate. So it's best to really think about these things from the beginning. Get a grasp of, what's our goal? How much do we want to have? We want to be able to pay for all of school, just a portion, half. What's our goal, and put a plan in place to do that, and then evaluate those options that you do have. The next slide is just going to go through some kind of benefits that you want to think about, financial benefits, tax benefits, planning benefits, and then, risk mitigation, basically, just some areas that you want to think about. And that's really where things like the 529 or even, cash value on insurance has really good tax benefits on growth and withdrawals if used for higher education. Other options, about financial benefits being how to allocate this, how do we choose investments, and that's kind of where we come in, obviously, to help with that, or your financial advisor that you have. And planning, how much do we have to save in these things? So putting together some projections and ideas of what do we want to try to have, and how much we have to sock away in order to have that in the future. And we talked about some risk mitigation, and that comes from proper asset allocation, and then making sure you have some strategy in case something happens, whether it be a death or a disability or something like that, which we talked about. Tax risk, we want to try to avoid major ordinary income tax that comes off of that. And then market risk, again, that's something that your advisors and us, that's a lot of what we work on to make sure that people have proper asset allocation to kind of make sure that this is something that doesn't have too much market risk, or that you have potential for a lot of loss when the child's close to the time when they're going to be going to school. And next couple kind of similar risks, but we got here on slide 18. Yep. So that is basically what a strategy that a lot of people use. Again, a couple more risks here, but the strategy a lot of people use are kind of doing a split approach that, sometimes having like insurance that builds cash value can be a nice benefit from a tax perspective. It doesn't have to be used for school. It does, if it's structured right, it can avoid that like mortality and disability risk. So they can kind of be self-completing in a way if one of those things happen. But then combining that with a 529, which is really the most efficient way to try to grow dollars and from a tax standpoint for education. But the two combined can really create a really nice benefit. And again, it's kind of self-completing if there's a death or disability. The dollars that are accumulated in this are not counted on the FAFSA form at all, not on the parent side or the child side. And they're typically safe. So there's not market risk there, and tax-free if used properly. So combining that with the 529 is actually a really good plan. That's something to think about. A lot of people don't think about having that as part of their college plan for their child, but it can be a pretty darn good option. So that is this is kind of the last slide we have to go through, but it's just things to think about. Like, is there what do I want to use? And if it's, a 529, how do I mitigate some of that market risk? How do I mitigate the risk, surrounding my health or mortality? And also the taxes. So having a plan to look at these 4 types of risks and make sure you've considered them, to make sure you have a plan that does what you want it to do regardless of these 4 risks is something that you really want to think about. And again, we're here to help kind of formulate these plans and formulate projections, and how do we know we're saving enough? Where should we be saving it? Are we hurting ourselves when we're following FAFSA based on how we're investing the dollars that we want to trying to save for education? And then looking at these risks and how do we really avoid those? So with that, I think we went through the disclosure on the beginning. So I don't think we have a disclosure at the end. So thank you everybody for listening in today, joining us. Any questions, as always, please feel free to reach out to us. We are happy to help, with your 529, your college savings strategy, any other financial issues you may have. If we don't talk to you beforehand, everybody have a happy holidays, and we will see you in the new year. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.